Hey folks, Bumbo here. Welcome back to our lengthening and loosening series where we're going through the routine that we covered in the first video of this series, breaking down each movement and each body area to talk a little bit more about how these areas are used in capoeira and how we can strengthen and prepare them for a lot of the movements that we do in this art. Today we're going to be talking about the hip flexors, which go from the top of this leg into your lower back, and these are used in a lot of different movements in capoeira, basically all over the place. At its core, the hip flexors help with movements like lifting your leg up, which is useful for a lot of straight kicks and movements like that. They also are helpful for pushing through a straight leg. So when we're in this lunge position, this back leg, we're stretching out the hip flexor and we're using that strength to stabilize our ginga and help with our positions here. The hip flexors can also be really useful for movements that might seem a little bit unrelated at first, including this super common knee forward position that we find ourselves in capoeira, where we have our knees over our toes. We go into this for variations of negativa, queijihins, lots of different movements like that. To do this position in a way that allows us to keep our chest upright requires our hip flexors to be strong enough to hold that position and get us into and out of that position comfortably. So in the sequence that we do at the starting of this series, the movement in particular that we're talking about is this lunge with a hip flexor stretch. So we have the back knee on the ground, the front knee forward, front leg forward, and we are lunging into this position and back out again. Some details that we want to focus on here for the hip flexor specifically. This is working a lot of different things, but it's also stretching the hip flexor on this back leg over here. One of the things that we want to focus on is as we start this position, we want to try to stack our shoulders over our hips and try to keep this upper body position the same as we drive our hips forward. This is going to help us focus on moving the hips rather than just moving the upper body, which can make us feel like we're moving forward, but actually my hips are not moving that much. So I want to try to keep everything stacked, nice and upright, which will also help stretch the hip flexor on this back leg. And my goal here is to try to get my knees to go as far over my toes as I comfortably can in this position, moving back and forth and then holding. So this position works a lot of different things. You might notice that this is actually quite similar in some ways to the ginga position that we find ourselves in a lot of the time, or in a esquiva baixa position. So we really want to be comfortable in this position moving forward. There's a couple of different exercises that I like for helping with this. One of the most basic ones, which looks basically the same, is this split squat position, where we're going to have one leg forward and drive the back leg into that same position as well. So the main variation here is that when you're doing a split squat, you'll have your back knee off of the ground and you're going to push that knee forward as far forward as you can, and then come into this position and back out again. The knees over toes guy on Instagram, who I linked in a previous video on shoulders, goes into a lot of depth about this movement pattern right here and different ways of building up to it. One of the things that he suggests that I find quite helpful in my own practice is using an elevated position to gradually work into this and try to build up to your goal, which is to be able to get the entire back of your thighs to cover your entire calf as your knee comes forward. So getting full contact down here in this position. So you can start this by using a chair or a pad or blocks or something to raise your feet and work on, again, keeping your shoulders stacked over your hips, driving your hips forward, pushing your knee as far forward as you comfortably can. It's okay if your heel comes up a little bit, although you want to gradually work towards having your heel flat as you do this, but trying to build comfort in this range of motion. Then you can add weights. So again, I don't have dumbbells here, but I'll use these props as an example. But you can add dumbbells here, hold, keeping that same position forward and down. You can start nice and slow with 5 seconds going all the way down, and then 5 seconds coming all the way back up, something like that. And then you can gradually lower the height, like lower the height, take off the weight, whatever you need to do to try to increase this range of motion over time. Here and back. That can be super helpful for building up not just your hip flexors and stretching your hip flexor on the other leg, but getting the whole chain on the front leg working together from your shins up to your thighs, up to your hip flexors, kind of getting everything moving together. The other thing that can be super helpful specifically for the hip flexors is doing any sort of weighted or resistance version of this leg lifting motion. You can do this if you have a gym where you have kettlebells or access to kettlebells. You can stand on something, hook a kettlebell around your foot, and lift here, or if you have ankle weights, you can use those. If you don't have access to those things, the easiest way for me to do this is with a resistance band. I'm just going to take this band and I'm going to put it around my feet here. I can use a wall or something, and I want to lean forward. And there's two versions of this. You can either have your back foot flat on the ground, or you can push up on the balls of your toes. I find I get a little bit more engagement if I push up on the balls of my toes. And then from here, I'm just going to use the resistance band to pull up as high as I can and back down. I like to try to hold at the top for a second, really make sure I'm engaging this hip flexor here to get this leg all the way up, and then back down. We do sets of 5, 10, 15 of these. You can increase the resistance band to get a little bit of extra workout. Do multiple sets of this. I find this sort of exercise really helpful for counterbalancing the act of sitting all day, which can shorten those hip flexor muscles. So that's going to be it for today. I hope you enjoyed this video content, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one.